Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, perhaps, depending on where you're watching here. This is another episode of Orange Weekly presented by Krause Health. My name is Brent Axe. We hop on here on the Syracuse Orange Football Facebook page and on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube every Thursday around this time, noon Eastern Time, 9 Pacific, 11 Central, 10 Mountain Time. What is that? What is that Hawaii time? I don't know. You guys tell me. But noon Eastern is when we hop on here live to talk Syracuse sports with you. Predominantly football today, though there's a little basketball in there. Jim Boeheim said some interesting things this week, so we'll note that before we close up shop for the day. If you missed the show live, that's too bad, because when we're live, you can hop in the comments and interact with us, and I'll answer your questions, chat with you. Jump in, be a part of the conversation, and I will highlight your comments as we go here. And of course, the big thing on our mind is a big football game at the Carrier. There you go. I did it. At the JMA Wireless Dome coming up Saturday at 3:30. And folks, this is going to be the loudest that building, Carrier Dome, JMA Wireless Dome, whatever you want to call it, has ever been. And I'll explain why in a moment here. It's really simple acoustics. But Syracuse just tweeted right before we came on, by the way, that there are less than 1,500 tickets available for this game. This is tracking to be a sellout. The last sellout at the Dome was the Clemson game 3 years ago. That was the game that was supposed to be game day. That was the game, number one team in the country, the whole thing. And, Clemson came in and beat Syracuse pretty good. It was 41-6 that day. Syracuse was coming off that big loss to Maryland the week before, and the 2019 season just did not live up to what we thought it could be following that 10-win season in 2018. The last non-sellout crowd that was this big was Clemson in 2013. That's when Syracuse entered the ACC, and it was that first matchup against, was that Taj Boyd, I believe was the quarterback. Sammy Watkins, I remember, had a big touchdown catch in that game for Clemson. This is going to be as big as those two, maybe not the Clemson game 3 years ago in terms of butts and seats, but if it's a sellout, it's right there with it. And as big as any game in the history of the Dome, attendance-wise, and this will only be the 7th top 20 matchup in the history of the Dome. Doesn't that sound low? I saw that earlier this week, and I went to the press guide. I triple checked that, but it's true. Only 6 times in the history of the Dome. There's certainly been some games on the road too, but this will only be the 7th time that Syracuse will play a top 20 matchup at the Dome. Now, the last time they played both as ranked teams was in 2001, which was nearly 20 years ago, against Boston College. So one way or the other, this is going to be a huge game. Arnett says that they're sell out the Dome, and it looks like they are on the cusp of doing that. It's Thursday as we speak here. We're 48 hours and change away from kickoff, and they're on track to sell out this thing. So it's going to be buzzing in Syracuse, New York on Saturday, and what an opportunity for the Orange. And the first thing that comes to mind for me, guys, is this will be the loudest that building has ever been. And it's simple acoustics. Why? Because when you go back to the old Dome, then the Carrier Dome, the roof was Teflon, right? Now, don't get me wrong. That place has been as loud as we have ever heard it. The loudest I've ever heard it, it's not like I'm sitting there measuring that thing. How they have the decibel meter, and it's like, this is equivalent to standing next to a jet engine. Like, I don't know what the numbers are, but the loudest I have ever heard the Dome was in 1987. Okay, last time Syracuse started 5-0, potentially 6-0 if they beat NC State on Saturday. When Michael Owens took in that 2-point conversion to beat West Virginia, that building exploded, and I doubt it's ever going to get louder than that. And that might be my bias there, because you remember those moments. And I mean, I was 10 at the time, don't get me wrong, and you tend to look back on those things more fondly. It becomes like a fish story, right? The fish was this big, then it was that big, then it was that big, then it was the size of a whale, right? So it's going to be tough for me to top that. But this will be, somebody get out the decibel meter and measure this, because the new roof in the Dome, the sound and how it bounces off that new roof. John Wildhack was actually saying this last week at one of his press conferences, and he's spot on. The way the sound bounces off the new roof, and remember, this is going to be the biggest game under the new roof of the Dome, football-wise, basketball-wise, anything really, other than, Elton John and Paul McCartney and some big events that have been at the Dome since the new roof came in, right? it's going to be as loud as it's ever been, because if you've been to a few games, there's been a lot of home games so far this year. 35,000, 37,000. No crowd is top 40,000 this year. It's certainly going to do that this time around, if not approach 50,000, with the sellout looming here against this game. 37,000 people sound like 50. The people that have been going to the game have been great. The students have been great. The fans that have been engaged. And there's something about that place now with the new roof and the acoustics of the building. Frankly, it's created some sound issues in the dome. The sound from the scoreboard when they do, like you have, I believe it's Kim Infante who's doing it now, who's like the sideline reporter, if you will, talking to people on the scoreboard. People can't hear that. Any announcements that are made, it's hard to hear Mike Veely, the PA announcer. So they're still working on the acoustics, and you can't replicate that, right? You can't replicate having 40,000 people in a building. The only time you can do it is literally when there's that many people attending an event. You can kind of adjust as you can. Acoustics have always been tough in the dome, but listen, it doesn't matter. You know, what's got to happen here is, can Syracuse fans make themselves a weapon? You know, I said this on the radio this week, and I'll repeat it here. If you're going to the game, specifically to people here in Central New York, we have people that watch the show from all over the place that won't be going to the game, but maybe this can apply to you, even in your living room. Every person that walks out of that dome on Saturday should not have a voice left. Every single person should walk out of that dome kind of talking like this. I can't, what's that? When I see you at Wegmans on Sunday morning, this is what I want to say. I can't talk. Voice went to the game. Lost my voice. Can't talk. That I want 50,000 people in town. I want to see a spike in lozenges. I want to see a spike in popsicles. I want to see a spike in all that stuff you get when you got a sore throat, right? Because what an atmosphere that can be. What an environment that could be. And frankly, what an advantage that can be for Syracuse in this game. Because you have, look, I don't think Devin Leary is going to play in this game, guys. I talked to Joe Giglio yesterday, who is a terrific radio host, 99.9 The Fan. He used to write for the Raleigh News and Observer. He doesn't think Devin Leary is going to play. I give Dave Doran a lot of credit for the gamesmanship. I give Dave Doran a lot of credit for making it seem like Leary could play. We're not going to see Devin Leary in this game, right? But I'll give Doran the props to make Syracuse believe he's going to play. Jack Chambers, pardon me. I keep saying Jake. Jack Chambers, their backup quarterback, will start. And something else that Joe Giglio told me is noteworthy in this game. I think we're going to see MJ Morris, the NC State quarterback. Now, Chambers is older. He's actually 25 years old. He's a transfer. He's got some experience, played at Charleston Southern, much more mobile than Devin Leary. Certainly not as good of a quarterback overall, not as good of a thrower. He can't throw the ball. It's not like he's coming in there and, you know, he's got to run the option 40 times a game. Although I do think NC State is going to run the ball a lot in this game, as we'll talk about here shortly. But we will see two quarterbacks in this matchup. It's just not going to be Devin Leary and Jack Chambers. It's going to be Jack Chambers and MJ Morris. Now, MJ Morris is their quarterback of the future. He's a young guy. You know, they take their quarterback seriously at NC State. Think about the quarterbacks that have played there. Phillip Rivers and Russell Wilson, Ryan Finley, Mike Glennon. You know, Devin Leary is kind of the next in line. We're not going to see him in this game. So if you're NC State and you're coming into an insane environment crowd-wise, you are going to want to test the will and the patience of not only the football team you're playing, but the crowd. You're going to want to run the ball. You're going to want sustained drives. You're going to want 9, 10, 11 play drives. You're going to want to challenge that Syracuse defense, and you're going to want to take the crowd out of it. And you're going to want to keep Garrett Schrader and that offense off the field as much as possible. Now, NC State, statistically, is not one of the top running teams in the ACC. You know, Demi Sumo Carnbay is going to play. He's their lead running back. He's not 100%, much like, frankly, Sean Tucker's not 100%, but we'll see how the bye week affects him. That's a big question I have in this game. NC State's defense is physical. They have the best set of linebackers in the ACC, and I thought that would be Syracuse, but unfortunately, Stephon Thompson went out, and I'm not sure if Derek McDonald's going to play in this game. So not that Mikel Jones and Marlo Wax Jr. are, you know, those are two of the best in the league. Don't get me wrong, but between Drake Thomas, Isaiah Moore, Peyton Wilson, that is going to be an issue. What we have seen 3 times this year is Sean Tucker, first game of the year against Louisville, Virginia, and in the Wagner game. Remember all the eruption? It was a couple of weeks ago, but to refresh your memory, Sean Tucker should have never been on the field in the second half of that game. It was a major, major blunder by Dino Babers, frankly, to put Tucker in particular back on the field. I didn't hate putting all the starters back out there because that Wagner defense was not going to touch. They were not going to breathe on Garrett Schrader. But Tucker had a recent history of injuries. He had 227 yards at halftime. Get him off the field and save him for this. And he's had a lower leg injury that he's been fighting through. So don't even mess with it. He goes down on the field again. Now he's had 2 weeks of rest and recovery, but look, I'm not Dr. Axe, and I'm not going to try and pretend to be. But he's clearly playing through something. It's one of those injuries that is not going to take you out. It's painful to play through. There's a pain tolerance there, but it's been painful enough that 3 times this year he's had to come off the field. Now, not out of the game, but off the field, right? So that's going to be something to watch. This Syracuse offensive line, and Allison brings it up here. Great to see Allison, as always, here in the chat. I'm worried about their defense. Do you think it's an advantage that both teams run the same 3-3-5? Also, is the backup even good? If Leary is out, we should crush them. So let's leave it up on the screen for a minute there, because there's a few good questions from Allison there. You should be worried about their defense, because this is the most physical team Syracuse is going to play all year, with no offense to Purdue or Virginia or Louisville, not even close. NC State hits. NC State is physical. They thrive on being physical. And remember, Syracuse is coming off of a bye and a game they were not challenged against Wagner. So you hope they didn't get soft over these past couple of weeks. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean, look, NC State was in a real battle with Florida State last week, and they played Clemson before that. So they're more in line, and they are in tune to a physical battle more than Syracuse is, right? So you got to keep that in mind. Do I think it's an advantage that both teams run the same 3-3-5? It can't hurt NC State, because one of the advantages, Allison, of the 3-3-5 is confusion. You watch it on film, but then you get out there and your eyes bug out. And you see a lot of guys pointing before this, like, what is going on right now? So at the very least, they won't have that confusion. Is the backup any good? Jack Chambers is pretty good. He's experienced. He's played at Charleston Southern. His stats this year aren't much. He's only 6 of 14. Katie brings it up here that he looked pretty confident in the last game. It's dangerous to overlook him. He certainly is a much more mobile quarterback than Devin Leary. And I do think we're going to see MJ Morris as well. But Katie nails it. You cannot overlook Jack Chambers. But I still do think NC State's going to be more of a grinding, physical, let's run the ball, take advantage of what we get, take what the defense gives us kind of thing. And I don't know if Syracuse can mention that. I was starting to talk about the offensive line. Syracuse currently, guys and gals, has the worst penalty rate in the country, 131 out of 131. And a bulk of that has come from the offensive line. Offsides, procedure penalties, holding in spots. A lot of it's offsides, and I feel like you've got to give them a little slack. It's only 6 games into a new offense. There's a lot more pre-snap motion before the ball is snapped, and that's an offensive line. Even with the experience they have, the only guy that didn't come back from last year's line to this year is Aaron Service. Everybody else is familiar names. But they're still getting used to a offense that, I know it's orange is the new fast, but moves quicker than that has a lot of pre-snap motion and can cause some of these things. Now, when it comes to penalties in this game, and I'm going to highlight another comment from Katie here, which is really good. When it comes to this game, here's where I will tolerate penalties. Don't play dirty, but you need to send a message. You need to send a message to NC State early in this game. I got the old D. Snyder song in my head. We're not going to take it. You have to prove to NC State that we're here to play physical too, that Syracuse will push back, right? That's going to be key. You cannot let NC State kind of wear you down and win the war of attrition. You cannot let them do that, especially with 50,000 people in the Dome and what this could be. But that's easier said than done. Syracuse can't just show up and do that with how physical NC State is as a team in the type of games they've been in. It's the old rest versus rust thing, guys. Will Syracuse have an advantage because they've been resting for the past couple of weeks, or will they be rusty and NC State's going to knock them off their feet and make them chase them the rest of the game. But as Katie says here, I think this will be a much closer game than people think by saying we'll crush them. I would expect players to be injured during this rough game, and the NC State defense looks very tough. I'd like to see who thinks Syracuse is going to crush NC State. I think most people feel like this game will be close. Syracuse is a 3.5-point favorite, and frankly, the only reason they're a favorite is the Devin Leary injury. I think, Vegas hopped on that, set the line where it is. And, Vegas always wants the money to go one way or the other on this. But it's basically a split. In even games, the home team will get 3 points typically. And I feel like it's fair to make Syracuse a slight favorite in this game, particularly with the Leary injury, but not by much. Now, if I'm wrong about this and Syracuse crushes NC State, you guys come right back here Saturday night on the postgame show, which we do on these same channels. If you're watching on Syracuse Orange Football on Facebook and Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube, we do this live after every game as well, presented by Krause Health. So come on back. And a lot of you in the chat have been here and been a part of those postgame shows. And it's always great to see you and get your opinions after the game. If I'm wrong on this, come on back and say how wrong I was. But I would be very surprised if this is not a close game into the fourth quarter and it's anybody's game. We've seen some close games this year. The Purdue game came down to the end, and one of the wackiest set of circumstances I think I've ever seen. And all the penalties that Purdue got. And then, of course, the Virginia game came down to it. Eric Coley makes the play at the end of the game on 4th and 4 and prevents Virginia the opportunity to get what would have been a game-winning field goal attempt in that situation. I feel like this is going to be one of those games, not maybe necessarily drama, just close, just physical, just long sustained drives, physical game. You're going to see two worn out football teams in the fourth quarter. Who's got enough left in the tank? Now, my prediction today, which you can check out at syracuse.com, along with Emily Leiker and Nate Mankin, our great coverage crew. We all pick Syracuse to win, so I don't know about that. Sometimes the old go against theory applies in big games like that. Somebody should have picked NC State just to balance things out, but we don't look at each other's predictions beforehand. Makes it spicy when they get posted on Thursdays on syracuse.com and in your post-standard newspaper. What was I starting to say there about this game? And I think it's going to be close. And everybody that predicted this, my score was 26-23. I think Emily had 24-21. So that means it's probably going to be 45-7 if everybody thinks it's going to be a blowout. You remember last year? Now, it was later in the year. Syracuse was banged up, kind of coming down the home stretch of what turned out to be a disappointing season, right? NC State dropped 28 points in the second quarter. And that was the same day that the basketball team lost to Colgate, if you recall. That was a dirty, rotten day if you're a Syracuse fan last year, right? So it's a much healthier team now. 5 guys are out for the year, coming off a bye, all the advantages, the backup, the crowd. But NC State's tough. NC State can absolutely win this game without Devin Leary. There's a reason NC State has been in the mix here to win the Atlantic Division. But think about this. If Syracuse beats NC State, they get Clemson next week. If they win or lose, they get Clemson next week. But if they win, think about they're in contention to win the ACC. They're in that conversation. You're going to have it all set up for you. You knocked off NC State. This is assuming a win. And then you get Clemson. The team right there in front of you that you got to knock off the perch. We'll see if they're still a top 5 team when they play Syracuse next week. And it's all right there. Now imagine they win that game. Now you're talking about a 7-0 team that's in the top 5 in the country, and they are in the conversation. The college football playoff rankings start coming out. And I believe it's next week or the week after that. It's pretty soon. And Syracuse is going to be in that conversation. That's what is potentially ahead of them. Or we're going to find out in these next couple of games what they're really made of, and maybe they're not quite on that level. That's what I like about these games. They're put up or shut up. They're truth serum. It's not speculation, opinion. I think this, I think that. We will know. And by the way, even if they lose these next couple games, not that anybody wants to see that. Then you got Notre Dame coming to the Dome after that. Didn't we all agree like a bowl game, a 6-7 win team would be something we'd all take for 2022? We all knew how tough the back end of the schedule was. We knew the entire schedule was tough, but we knew the back end was really going to be what challenges this team. It's all right there in front of them. It's there for the taking, and it's exciting. I do want to get a little hoops talking here because I think there were some interesting things that Jim Boeheim said this week. But what we're not doing here on October 13th is pining for basketball. We're not saying it's a basketball season yet. Basketball, you guys can wait, right? There's some cool preseason stuff happening and some conversations going on. But I love that football is still very much on top of mind. The buzz, we mentioned this game is heading for a sellout here. They just, they got to keep it up. That's right, because Syracuse fans can be fickle. They can be fair weather. They can jump out as easily as they can jump in. And if they keep winning, I mean, everybody loves a winner. Everybody loves an undefeated team. And it's all right there in front of them, right? This is a tough back end of the schedule. NC State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Pitt, Florida State. I don't think I'm going in order here, but Wake Forest, even Boston College. That's not going to be an easy game. There is not an easy game on the slate, but you know what else is not on the slate? A team that is out of, you're not out kicking your coverage here. There is no team on that schedule left that is in the no way, no how category, Clemson included. You can beat every one of these teams. You match up with every one of those teams. They're just as concerned about you as you would be about them, right? If anything, they're more concerned because if Syracuse continues to prove they're for real, whatever that means, then this is going to be a lot of fun to keep football in the conversation as long as we can go here. Richard jumps in and he says, I like that the Cuse is finding a way to win the close games. And I definitely think this one's going to be a nail biter. Love that the fans have embraced this team. 49,000 could be a huge 12th man. Go Cuse. Charles says, root for the home team. Bet with no shame. I love it. Saturday football home game. We are SU Sports. Rob adds this. NC State is likely going to zero in on Tucker and Gadsden, which will open up shots downfield to Alford, Cooper, Jackson, etc. Don't forget DeMarcus Adams in there too, Rob. The question is, will our offensive line allow Schrader the time to make these throws? Good points as always, Rob. And Allison brought it up earlier with the 3-3-5, right? That is going to give Syracuse a struggle with teams that have mobile quarterbacks. They haven't seen a ton of them, which is why I'm wondering about Jack Chambers here. Well, that goes the other way. The one thing, I talked to David Thompson earlier this week. He's a beat reporter who covers NC State. Very famous NC State name, right, for you old college basketball fans. And one thing David said when I asked him, I said, what is NC State concerned about? And immediately he said, Garrett Schrader running the football. That's why I think Schrader running the ball is going to be the difference in the fourth quarter, either by setting up a winning field goal or breaking away for an opportunity that sets up Syracuse in the red zone. Syracuse has been perfect in the red zone this year. I would have liked to see a few more touchdowns. I'm not even counting Wagner. That game was such a waste of time. I can't even believe they played that team. But you need touchdowns in the red zone because the possessions are going to be limited against NC State. Rob with many good points there. Now, before we wrap up shop here, I did want to note a couple basketball things. We all got football fever, and that should take precedence and should be the feature on the marquee. But, on the side of the marquee, like the marquee has the feature tonight at the Landmark, it's Annie. But coming soon, it's Hamilton, right? On the side of the marquee is that Syracuse basketball is practicing. There's been media days this week. So there was ACC media day earlier this week. Mike Waters was there, did a spectacular job covering that with a number of articles that you should check out on syracuse.com. Friday is Orange Madness and media day locally here in Syracuse, right? The basketball team actually did kind of its own version of Orange Madness in Rochester a week ago. This will be the first look for many people locally, right? And what Jim Boeheim flat out said this week, we are going to make the NCAA tournament. Now, there was a time and a place, friends, when that was just, okay, good for you. That's what you're supposed to do. This is Syracuse basketball, right? It's gotten more difficult to make the tournament, not only for Syracuse, but for a lot of teams. Syracuse is coming off its first losing season last year. And for Jim Boeheim to make that kind of proclamation is noteworthy because this is such a young basketball team. Now, you have Joe Girard back. You have Jesse Edwards back. You have Benny Williams back, though he's got to really take a big step up here this year. So you have some veterans, but there is so much young talent on this team that is going to play. So for Boeheim to say, we're going to make the NCAA tournament, puts what I like to call good pressure on this team. That's good pressure. That's not too much pressure on a young team. That's good pressure. So listen, I've heard some of these things before, right? But I believe Jim Boeheim on a few things. One, how good Judah Mintz is. Jim Boeheim has been just lavishing praise on Judah Mintz as one of the best freshman point guards he's had, compared him to Johnny Flynn, but he's a bigger Johnny Flynn. People that have been to practice, I've not been to practice myself. I don't know why. I mean, John Rothstein goes to practice. Uncle Brent tries to go to practice, and all of a sudden the door's locked. It's funny how that works. No, I'm kidding. I haven't tried to go, and there's not as much media access as usual. But people that have been to practice, people that I've talked to that have seen this, Judah Mintz cannot be stopped. Now, we'll see what happens when he starts playing teams that wear other uniforms, right? But there's no one on this team that can stop him. Judah Mintz can get to the basket. Kadir Copeland has been lighting it up at practice. He can get to the basket, right? Benny Williams, if he steps up, is somebody that could be a factor around the basket this year. Not to mention Symir Torrance, I think, proved at the end of last year that he's become more of an offensive weapon than we think. He's got to shoot the ball, but he can get to the hoop, right? So Jim Boeheim said that. Jim Boeheim put all that praise on Judah Mintz, and I believe Jim Boeheim when he says this team's going to play man-to-man. Now, it's not going to be 30 minutes of man-to-man, but you got to give Boeheim credit, and that he looks at this team, and he's going to have 3 guards out there at times that it just doesn't make sense to play the zone. You're hurting yourself if you play the zone. So we'll see man-to-man. It just depends on who are the 5 on the floor. And in that case, you will have a lineup that makes sense to play man-to-man defense. But I really like that Boeheim said that. We will make the NCAA tournament. He didn't say we can. He didn't say we're capable. He didn't say, man, if some things come together. He said, no, we're making the tournament, right? And frankly, like Jim Boeheim entering his 47th year as head coach, I mean, this guy's not messing around anymore, right? But put the pressure on that team. Think how college basketball has changed, right? One and done players. Judah Mintz could be in that category if he's as good as everybody seems to think he is. You put together a team, you're going to have a completely different roster next year. So you can't just be like, well, maybe in a year or two, this team could do, you don't have that luxury anymore. You don't. You put together a team, you got to make a run as it is, right? Jim Boeheim also said that, and I think it's fair to bring up, Jesse Edwards was averaging 16 and 10 before he got hurt. And that was kind of what sunk Syracuse's battleship. It's a fair point to bring up. Would Jesse have been the difference that would have got Syracuse into the tournament last year and avoided a losing season? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, they had that huge spark at the end in the ACC tournament. Jimmy Boeheim, dropping 28 points and what was a great game against Duke, right? Remember, Buddy Boeheim got suspended for that game for the punch in the game prior to that. I don't know. They would have been closer. They would have had a winning season. But they were still they weren't even on the bubble. Obviously, they finished with a losing season. But the only way they were getting in was if they won the ACC tournament. Having Jesse, do you win 5 of your last 7? I mean, he was starting to really hum. We mentioned the numbers, but he was this is a guy who's going to explode this year and be potentially first team all ACC, if you ask me. Gerard is going to be off the ball, which is huge. Jim said he could average 20 points a game. Wouldn't be stunned to see that because he's just going to be open and free. And frankly, that's where Gerard should have always been at the 2. I understand why he had to play point guard at times. But listen, what's going to be interesting about this team to me is the balance in scoring. I understand how important the 3-point shot is, speaking of Gerard, but they set a record. They set a team record for 3-pointers last year. And what did it do? It limited you offensively because Syracuse was easy to defend because you knew that they were limited in scope. With all those guys that can get to the basket, combined with the guys. And by the way, we haven't even mentioned Justin Taylor. We haven't even mentioned Chris Bunch. We haven't even mentioned a couple other freshmen that could make their way out there. Another thing I believe Boeheim in, I've heard this before and it hasn't panned out, we're going to play 9 or 10 guys. Now, it's easy to say that in October. Then you play a few games, you're like, oh boy, that ain't the case. And you kind of limit it back to what it usually is, around 8 guys in the rotation. But I just like how Jim Boeheim sounds, the confidence he's putting out there. Some, by his terms, bold proclamations. He's usually not that in stone on things. But when he is, he really believes it. And more often than not, he turns out to be right. Where I'm going to disagree with Jim, and we'll end the show on this note. Do not expand the NCAA tournament. We do not need to do that. I talked to Greg Sankey over the summer, the commissioner of the SEC. Jim Phillips was saying it. As I mentioned, Mike Waters wrote about that this week. Jim Boeheim has advocated for years. No, do not expand the tournament. That's one of those, it's fine where it is. I understand there's better players and better teams out there, but it should be hard to make the tournament. 68 is fine. Leave it where it is for now. But I'm probably going to end up losing that argument, but I'm going to hold the line on that one as long as I can. All right, that is another episode of Orange Weekly presented by Krause Health. It is going to be, if anything, no matter who wins and loses, what an environment Saturday in Syracuse, New York. A top 20 football game, only the 7th in the history of the Dome, and it could sell out. As noted, if you missed it earlier, Syracuse, I'll put it out there today. There's less than 1,500 tickets available for this game at this point. I think we're going to see a sellout or darn close to it at the Dome, and we'll see how it plays out after the game. So we got a 3:30 kickoff. Get right back here to these same channels. Syracuse Orange Football on Facebook, Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube. I also hop on Twitter, so if you follow me on Twitter, Brent Axe Media, you'll see this show live, interacting with the comments as you guys have been doing today. If you missed this show, Orange Weekly, or the post-game show, it's easy to find on the replay. It's up on YouTube. I embedded in my recap on syracuse.com. There will be a separate post on syracuse.com for Orange Weekly. If you're watching on Facebook, it automatically archives there. So plenty of opportunity to watch the show back in case you miss it here live. But we stream Thursdays at noon here on Orange Weekly. We'll be live right after Syracuse and NC State. So 3:30 kick, probably about 7:30 or so by the time we get on. Usually try to get on about 10 or 15 minutes after the final whistle and talk to you, talk some football. We'll see how it goes. It's going to be a big game, no matter what, in Syracuse, New York on Saturday. Thanks for watching another episode of Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health. You guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you again on Saturday night.